Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about Russia's information strategy as they move forward, annexing these parts of Ukraine. I'm going to use exclusively Russian sources. I'm going to cover about 12 different articles, including directly from the Kremlin, including a Russian polls, the polls that they actually rely on for what's going on in Russia. I'm going to use Pravda, I'm going to use RT. Stay with me, and you don't want to miss any piece of this because each piece, it's kind of like a Lego component to help you understand how the Russian mindset works. I want to start with this thought, though, this premise. Vladimir Putin is speaking, when he speaks to the West or to Ukraine, he's speaking to a domestic audience. Now, if you get that in your head, that's point number one, and that's going to carry you a long way into understanding what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. So we're going to start here. This is the Levada Center. The Levada Center is Russian polling. It's not state-run polling, but it's legitimate polling about what's going on. So let's look at Putin's approval rating first. Okay, here we see this big spike. We see a big spike, and we see a big spike in his approval. So what's going on? Well, let's look at the time frame. This is 1999. What's going on in October and September and November of 1999? Well, if we go to Wikipedia, we see that the Second Chechen War started in August of 1999. So what happened? It's an open question as to what happened. There was some bombing. Putin blames the Chechens. He invades Chechnya, and look at his poll numbers go up. So this is an old playbook. Now, let's go over here. What happened in 2013? That was the Maidan revolution. And 2014, he invades into Crimea and Donbass. And look at what happens to his approval. It's remarkable. This is 2014. Okay, what happened over here? This is December of 2021. January, February, look at his poll number skyrocket up to 82%. But then again, what's going on here? It's now September of the same year, and his poll numbers seem to be dropping. So he's got to take some evasive actions quickly. But before I show you anything more about that, let me also show the parallels here. Now look at 2014 and look at what's going on here in 2022. Now let's also look at the approval of the government. Look at that. The approval of the government is very high. Let's also look at the situation in the country. It's a right track, wrong track kind of question. Right track when they're invading and taking over Crimea. Right track when they are going into Ukraine. So that's the way the people are thinking about it. But let's also look at the attitudes towards the West. See, Putin needs a boogeyman. He needs the West, particularly the United States, but Europe, to be the bad guy. So the West is particularly negative. It's at its height of negativity here after that invasion. And it's also at its height of negativity here with 75% negative attitude, Russian attitude toward the West. Attitude toward the EU is very similar. So this will explain some of what you see in the Russian media as we move forward. Now let's take this and move toward today and look at a newer poll. So this is the same organization. This is the Levada Center. Again, this is a Russian translation or translated page on Google. But let me just look at this one or two places. Okay, about partial mobilization. So I can't remember who it was, and I will give you a shout out if you remind me, but one viewer mentioned in a comment that I think partial mobilization was so we could leave the hope that there won't be a full mobilization in Russia. And I thought, wow, how did I miss that? I think that's exactly right. I don't know for sure, but I think that that's right. The prevailing feelings about the partial mobilization announced in the Russian Federation are anxiety, fear, horror at 47%, shock 23%, pride for Russia only 23%. So the only positive one so far is 23%, and anger, indignation 13%. 9% of respondents said they were indifferent. So about a third of the population is either pro or indifferent. So that means 2/3 aren't. So far, about 75% of the population has been in favor of this, and now it's dropped down a little bit to 72, just a couple days after the partial mobilization. 2/3 of the respondents are afraid because of the hostilities in Ukraine, and a general mobilization would be announced in Russia. They said they're definitely afraid at 36%, or rather afraid at 30%. So again, 66% of the population. So mobilization is a really risky gambit. it for Vladimir Putin, because now it's easy to be supporting him when you have no skin in the game. But if you could be mobilized, now you're going to see things differently. Okay, let's move on to the next article. Why? So this is Pravda, and so you're going to see these like almost farcical kind of headlines. But here, stay with me. Why was it important for Biden to start a war in Ukraine? Like, Biden start a war? What? Okay, so it's rolling back the clock to 2014, saying Joe Biden was the vice president with the Obama government and John Kerry was the Secretary of State. Biden was the driving force when it came to bringing out a coup d'etat in Ukraine. Now, no, that's factually incorrect. The U.S. government was trying to intervene in order to bring the sides together to kind of get a deal with the former president who led the Maidan revolution. But it wasn't trying to create a coup. But this is the narrative that Russians are getting, and that's important to understand. That's why he willingly stood up when things started to tighten in Maidan Square in Kyiv. He was running around there with Victoria Nuland and John McCain, handing out candy and bread to the right-wing extremists who are responsible for the violence. Since 1991, Washington has spent $5 billion in Ukraine on, quote, democracy-promoting measures. And they did, but they see those democracy-promoting measures as somehow CIA nefarious undermining of stuff. Okay, in fact, the funds were used to support subversive activities through so-called front groups that worked with Nazi Steven Bandera from the Hitler era. Okay, so you're working with whatever groups are available, and if some have a holdover, hangover legacy of something shady from the past, whether it is Nazi tainted or Soviet tainted, you can't avoid this in this part of the world unless you start your own group. And so if you're working with locals, that kind of thing can happen. Okay, now it gets even better. But the economic and moral support that the USA provided never went to fighting undemocratic oligarchs. Instead, it was fanning Nazi-style racist sentiments against Russian population and the minorities. So in Ukraine, that would be Russian speakers or Russians. This form of mental case was found mainly in western part of the country. It's truly pitiful that the Ukrainian soldiers do not realize that they are not fighting for their motherland. They are fighting for Uncle Sam, who wants to retain power over Ukraine. It was on February 24th when Ukraine lost its independence and became an American vassal state. I don't think Ukrainians are thinking that at all. I think they're incredibly grateful that the U.S. is actually arming them and supporting them and providing them $16 billion now in aid. American vassal state. It's not that at all. But again, from the Russian perspective, oh, those bad Americans, they're just trying to prop them up so they can be our enemy. Why is Uncle Sam doing this? He can use the country as bait in his goal of fragmenting and destabilizing Russia. Like this is what Russians are reading, right? Okay. Now this paragraph was really bizarre, but you can perhaps also talk about another important reason. Ukraine has always been Europe's most important center of Jewish Zionism. Like, what? I thought you were just talking about Nazis and now you're sounding all Nazi. Okay, so that's the article. It all makes sense when you understand the polls and how it's framed, where where Putin's poll approvals rating, it's also in tandem with the U.S. is bad, and the U.S. is bad, and the EU is also bad. So the West is bad, and you have to understand what's going on in light of that. Okay, let's go into the next article. Oh, by the way, before I go on to the next article, if you want to read about this, you can read about this. Go just Google it. What Joe Biden actually did in Ukraine in the New York Times. Or my favorite, and I'm going to link this below, Ukraine's Maidan, Russians' war. Okay, so this is a Ukrainian historian who is in Maidan, I believe, and he's a Harvard history professor. I'll link this below. I read this book and it opened up a whole world of understanding about what happened in 2014 in Ukraine. Okay, next. Accession of new territories, billions of dollars in expenses, and trillions in revenues. So when they capture these territories because of the referendum, they're going to have to spend billions of dollars to fix it, but they're going to get trillions of dollars in revenues. Now, this is a really fascinating article, and I'll tell you why. The Washington Post announced the approximate cost of mineral deposits in the new regions at about $12.4 trillion. When I first saw about the invasion of Ukraine, I was like, huh? What? There's the mineral deposits here in Donbass, particularly, that's worth a lot of money. There's also gas reserves here in the sea and here. And so this is one of the reasons why they were trying to take all the way to Odessa, because they could have landlocked Ukraine and captured all the mineral rights in the sea at the same time. And had they done that, they would have really had a coup right there. The 4 territories measure a total of 109 square kilometers. Okay, what does that mean? That's about the size of Bulgaria. So they have just captured in the sham referendums, and what they're saying is legally now part of Russia, is about the size of Bulgaria. So just to put that into some context. And then they're going to get things like the steel works and graphite and aluminum plant, magnesium plant and automobile, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is all part of what's in those territories. And in the Sea of Azov, they now have more ports, agriculture, tourism, logistics in the south. Now look again at the map. Okay, here's the map. What they've just captured here, they have Russian bases here, and Russia only extends down to here. So they now extended Russia from here to here. Okay, so that's really important for Russia as strategically to be able to carry this land. Okay, so let's go on to the next article. Mobilize citizens to control and defend the new territories. I only want to show you one line here. Mobilize citizens after coordination. Coordination works as like basic training. Will proceed to filling the mission and control and defend the new Russian territories. Like, this is Mother Russia just as much as Moscow is, and that's the way they're going to proceed. And then they're going to act as if, and now, again, this is media fed to Russians. So if you understand that this is for a domestic audience, and then there's a secondary audience. This is part number 2. There's a second audience. These articles will be then propagated down, and it'll be wholesale plagiarized in Islamic and Hindu and Asian magazines and news articles, and they're fine with that. They actually want them to do that. They want to spread their message, and this is why I'm telling you, because I want you to be able to counter the message. Okay, next article. Russian President Vladimir Putin will sign accession treaties, and he's going to sign them on Friday, and there's going to be a ceremonial signing, and that's what we know here. And so they're just making some headway about that. I got to keep moving. NATO tested underwater equipment close to Nord Stream. So we don't know what happened with the Nord Stream pipeline the other day, but the West was blamed, the U.S. was blamed, and so they're talking about, well, NATO has a lot of ships and equipment out there. The Black Sea, according to Maria Zakharova, is packed full of the bloc's military infrastructure. Zakharova dismissed any allegations that Russia was behind the incident. May I ask you a question? When exactly did Russia decide that it wanted to stop supplying energy to Europe? She asked. Well, they've been blackmailing again and again. And there's other people. Tucker Carlson was on last night talking about, why would Russia blow up its own thing? Well, why would the U.S. do it? So it really comes down to, it's probably either the U.S. or Russia, right? The U.S. has been trying desperately to avoid a hot war with Russia. That's why it hasn't provided Ukraine with certain long-range missiles, because they could be used, and then they could accuse the U.S. of attacking Russian soil, which is what they're going to do with the new territories. So it's probably not the U.S., but maybe it is. I don't know. I'm just speculating, okay? But Russia has been using energy as a weapon this whole time. And if they have to scuttle this, they're not going to be selling it to the West anyway. They're starting a pipeline to China. They're selling to Brazil. They're selling to South Africa. They're selling to all kinds of, to India, to all kinds of other places instead of the West. So it could be. I don't know. Okay, who wins from demolishing the EU gas lifelines? This is another RT article doing the same thing. Speculation abounds since Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines designed to carry cheap Russian gas to Europe. The outcome ultimately means that Europe's economic impetus in seeking peace with Russia has been seriously undermined, if not literally destroyed. Until now, there was always a chance of reconciliation. Well, reconciliation on their terms, not actual reconciliation. At the onset of the Ukrainian conflict, it was Washington that egged on the EU to mirror measures in Washington itself it had adopted in an effort to deprive Moscow of revenues and fuel of interest and objectives in Ukraine. That's correct. Washington was saying, don't buy Russian oil because that's going to purchase bullets that are going to kill Ukrainians. That's true. The problem is that the EU economy was far more intertwined with Russia's than America's. U.S. officials have even tried to market their natural gas in the past as freedom molecules. So what they're saying is, see, the U.S. wants to displace and they want to sell their gas. No, I mean, that's not it. In fact, our gas is getting more expensive because it's being sold internationally rather than just domestically now. Biden himself said Nord Stream 2 during a press conference in February before the Ukrainian conflict had even popped off. Now, he said, we'll bring an end to it. And I saw the video. He did say that, but politicians say a lot of things trying to posture or pose. This was as Biden was like trying to tell Putin, don't do it. This is a bad idea, while he's speaking to a domestic audience, but telling Putin, don't do it. Okay. So that's what's going on there. Okay, let's look at a Kremlin article. This is a meeting with the heads of the security agencies of the intelligence services of the CIS countries. What are the CIS countries? This is the Commonwealth of Independent States: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. Okay, so these are like former Soviet satellite kind of, and the regions right around Russia. Okay, now what's interesting is they have this meeting, and even in this meeting, we are seeing the difficult processes of forming a more just world order. Really? Forming a more just world order? You just stole 4 territories from your neighbor. This process is accompanied by the well-known problems that lie on the surface. The old unipolar hegemony is inexorably collapsing. That means the world order, where the U.S. is kind of dominant, the West is largely dominant, and he calls this the unipolar world. He wants a bipolar world, and what he means by that is that there's the Russia-led coalition over here to counterbalance the U.S.-led coalition. We will see the consequences of this, clinging to the past and trying to pursue a policy of dictate in all areas, from international relations and the economy to culture and sports. The notorious collective West is creating more and more problems and crises. It's almost laughable, except he's serious. Okay, so the West is to blame. Remember his poll numbers. The West is to blame. In the process, it's not stopping at anything, and it exerts pressure on the countries that choose a sovereign path of development. Not Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't get to choose a sovereign path of development. Only Russia does. That do not want to obey it, but want to choose their own path and future independently and freely, and maintain their culture and traditions and values. Like, a Ukrainian right now is pulling out their hair going, what are you saying? You're like, he's talking about those 4 oblasts, but Ukrainians are going, that's exactly what we want. We want to have our own say without your intervention. So this is, again, it's to a domestic audience. That's what he's talking about. Now, he's also, and this is carried then in RT, where U.S. and its allies can't accept the inevitable end of their hegemony. And he talks about, he's quoting, the unipolar hegemony is collapsing, and the same kind of stuff again. And it gets carried then. So this was theater. This was political theater in this meeting. This was not a let's have a discussion. This was political theater. Same thing when we get to this one. He's a meeting with the permanent members of the Security Council, and essentially Putin just lectures them for a little while, and he says this: I would like to discuss a very important, vitally important issue for us. I mean the management of activities of partial mobilization. And he said mistakes were made, and he says a lot of questions are being raised about this, and we will deal with each case, and if a mistake was made, I repeat, it must be corrected. Why? Because he's going back to the poll numbers here, where people are really worried about, what's going on. There's anxiety and fear and horror and shock, and pride for Russia is very low, and he needs the soldiers, so he has to affirm this. Okay, Ukraine. Now, there's some other RT and Pravda and TASS articles that are a little different. They're just meant to kind of poke the West in the eye, or say something bad about somebody, or just raise a question. It's almost like the have you stopped beating your wife kind of question. So here's one of those. Ukraine has taken in at least 100 million in crypto donations this year, but what have officials in Kyiv done with the money? Right? And so all this is kind of a hit piece saying it seems to have disappeared from public view. There's no real facts to support anything, but that's the entirety of the article. Then you see this, and this one made me mad. U.S. VP speaks of strong alliance with North Korea. With North Korea? What? Okay, yes. Kamala is not noted for being the most articulate speaker, and I'm a Republican. She's a Democrat, but she's my vice president right now, and I absolutely like. I don't mind seeing Fox News say bad things about her, but it really bothers me when I see Russian media talking bad about my vice president. As much as I might disagree with her, I don't want to see that. The United States shares a very important relationship, which is an alliance with the Republic of North Korea. It's a little slip. She meant to say South Korea. Later on, she commented correctly about South Korea rather than North Korea. But, see, look, she doesn't even know what she's doing. Okay, but that's fine. It's kind of like, if somebody says, I hate my sister, I hate my sister, I hate my sister. And then somebody down the street, a neighbor kid says, I hate your sister. Whoa, wait a minute. Now it's on. It's that kind of thing. Okay. So I've hopefully painted a picture of how everything is working in Russian media. And the big thing that you need to know is it's all about the polls. If you look at Putin's polling, and here he's doing something and he's getting great approval for it, the war starts going against him, his approval's losing, and so he's doing the referendums now quickly, partly to salvage the war effort, but partly for the polls. If you understand that, that's going to carry you a long way. Now, if you want to understand the bigger picture of other Russian propaganda, other lies, then you absolutely need to see this explainer. It's called The Russian Mindset, and it's linked right here. Please watch that. Thank you for your time. Please subscribe if you like this. I'll be back tomorrow.